Tremendous zechus for those who frequent Torah Anytime or other platforms that feature shiurim round the clock, 24 hours a day. Rabbi Glatstein is definitely a mainstay on many of those platforms. Someone who not only provides quite a bit of Torah content on a daily, weekly, monthly, and yearly basis, but takes tours. You have Machon Magazine. You'll find plenty of ads where Glatstein is taking people. His combination of not only a tremendous amount of Torah Yedios and knowledge, but also of Jewish history, of understanding Klal Yisrael, and that blend is a very unique thing, certainly in a more young age as opposed to somebody who's much, much older. And Rav Glatstein happens to be a scholar in residence in Boca Raton Synagogue this Shabbos, and so we were fortunate enough to be able to host him, to be able to get inspiration and to learn and to grow from him. I don't want to take any more of his time. Please rise and welcome Rav Glatstein.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. I want to share with you today a perspective on a mitzvah that in our generation is very often not given the appreciation and the attention that it deserves. But we need to put it in the proper historical perspective in order to understand what our role in this world is and what our role in bringing the Geula for Klal Yisrael. I want to share with you an observation. This is not my own observation. This is an observation of a Gadol B'Yisrael. This is an observation that he made about 20 years ago. One of the leaders of the yeshiva world, one of the greatest Torah giants of the last generation, Reb Aaron Leib Steinman, a great tzaddik who lived in Bnei Brak. He's a Jew who had really no worldly or material possessions. He lived in the simplest apartment with just table, chairs, and even his bed, he had a board under his bed. But he was the go-to address for the entire Torah world on all issues. And he had a very interesting observation. He said, for the most part, he observes that in this generation, there are many people, not everybody, but there are many people who they themselves not only could be parents or grandparents, there are many grandparents that are taking care of elderly parents. I want to tell you something. My parents, my father's parents were Holocaust survivors. My father didn't have grandparents. He didn't know his grandparents. Many people my father's age didn't know their grandparents. They didn't necessarily make it through the Holocaust. Many of them did not. So my father grew up in this country. He knew his parents. He didn't know grandparents. He didn't know grandparents. I knew my parents, grandparents, great-grandparents. My parents, who were themselves our grandparents, they were taking care of elderly parents. Not everybody has that privilege, but it's a phenomenon that Rabbi Aaron Leib Steinman said is unique, so to speak, to the 20th century and the 21st century. We never had this before in the Jewish people, where so many generations where you had elderly parents or grandparents taking care of their own parents. And he said there's a reason for this. There's a historic reason for this. You see, says Rabbi Aaron Leib Steinman, we're headed toward the end of days. We're almost there. We're almost on the finish line. And it's, so to speak, a battle between the Jewish people and our arch rival, Eisav. Eisav is the progenitor, the prototype of the nations of the world. You see, there's one thing that even though we're a very righteous nation, of course, va'amech kulam tzadikim, Hashem loves every single Jew, and we're full of mitzvahs. The only thing is there's like one little advantage that Eisav has over the Jewish people. It's a particular mitzvah that Eisav specialized in more than perhaps Yaakov Avinu. You know, actually, if you remember in a couple of parshios from now, where Yaakov Avinu, after running away from home, Yaakov Avinu spends 22 years in the house of Lavan, and he's finally headed back to Eretz Yisrael. And who rears his ugly head to try to come and attack Yaakov Avinu? Eisav. Do you remember the pasuk? Vayira Yaakov ma'od vayetzer lo. Yaakov was very frightened. He was very afraid. And the Rishonim explained, what was Yaakov afraid of? Yaakov was afraid of a one particular mitzvah that Eisav had that he could not match up to. And that is, Eisav was specialized in kibud of va'im. Nobody respected their father like Eisav. In fact, do you remember the pasuk? We're going to read it next week. That when Yitzchak Avinu wanted to bless Eisav before he passed away, so in the beginning of the parsha, Eisav comes back from the field. He's tired, he's hungry, he's famished. And Yaakov Avinu is cooking this porridge, this stew. And Eisav says, you know what, I'm so hungry. Here, Yaakov, I'll give you whatever you want. So Yaakov says, will you sell me the birthright? What does Eisav say? Sure, I'll sell you the birthright. Hine anoichi hoylech lamas. I'm going to die anyway. What did Eisav mean, I'm going to die anyway? What he meant was that he's going to die serving his father. Because actually Eisav risked his life daily to go hunting to be able to bring food for his father. Think about the words that Eisav is saying. Hine anoichi hoylech lamas. I'm going to die anyway because Eisav daily risked his life to serve his father. Avram Avinu only risked the life of Yitzchak one time at the Akedah. But Eisav literally risked his life on a daily basis to serve his father. So Eisav said, I'm going to die anyway, here's the birthright. In fact, Reb Shimon ben Gamliel said that I don't come to the toenails of Eisav when it comes to honoring my father and mother, because Eisav wore special garments. Every time he served his father, he put on a suit and tie to serve his father. Rav Shimon Gamliel says, I can't do that. I'm not on the level to serve my father like the way Eisav does. So Eisav has this special merit in his repertoire that no matter what we try to do, we're always trying to catch up to the kibbud av of Eisav. Therefore, Rabbi Aaron Leib Steinman says that in the final generation, that's us, God gives special opportunities to honor father and mother that sometimes even grandparents themselves, they're still servicing their father and mother. Because in the end of days, we got to give that final knockout punch to Eisav. Now, it's interesting. It actually works both ways. Let me show you what I mean. In Megillas Esther, the hero for the Jewish people, of course, was Esther. What do we know about Esther? Ki ein la av va'im. She had no father and she had no mother. She was an orphan. She not only did she not have a father and mother, she never even saw her father. She never even saw her mother. And the Medrash says that Hashem, as He's preparing the redemption for the Jewish people, He says, I can only save the Jewish people through someone who has no father and no mother. Why? Why is it a positive? Why is it an ingredient of salvation for the Jewish people that the person should not have a father and mother? There's a very amazing insight of Rabbi Yonasan Eibeshitz. Yonasan Eibeshitz was one of the great achronim. He was one of the greatest teachers of Torah in the last 500 years. He taught in the course of his career as a Rosh Yeshiva more than 24,000 students. He was the Rav of Prague. He writes an amazing idea. Our sages teach us that if somebody wants to do a mitzvah and circumstances don't allow them to do the mitzvah, Hashem considers it as if they did the mitzvah. The words of the Gemara are Chishev lasois mitzvah, if you think to do a mitzvah, benenas, and you have extenuating circumstances, mala alav kilo asa, it's considered as if you did the mitzvah. Now, if a person wants to do a mitzvah, and Hashem considers it as if they did the mitzvah, Hashem, you see, when we actually do mitzvahs, they're always limited by human shortcoming. Even if you do like this amazing mitzvah, did you do it with full kavanah, with full avas Hashem, with full reverence for Hashem? Did you fulfill all the details of the mitzvah? Even the greatest tzaddik who performs a mitzvah on the highest level, it will always be somewhat deficient because of human shortcoming. But imagine somebody who wishes they could do a mitzvah, and for whatever reason, circumstances don't allow them, and then Hashem credits them with the mitzvah. Hashem doesn't credit them with a deficient mitzvah. Hashem credits them with the most perfect mitzvah that exists because it's a gift from Hashem. So actually, Rabbi Yonasan Eibeshitz says, the greatest mitzvahs sometimes in our back pocket are the ones not that we did do, but the ones that we wanted to do, and we were limited by circumstance, and Hashem awarded us. So watch this. He says, in the times of Purim, who's the enemy we need to overcome? Haman. Haman is a descendant of Eisav. So Haman is supported by the great merit of Eisav of Kibbud Av Va'em. And there's no one who could stand up to him. No, there is. There's one person. You know who they are? Someone who has no father and someone who has no mother. And their whole life they wished they could honor their father and mother. And Hashem says, oh, you wished you could? I'm going to gift it to you. You're the only one who could stand up and match up to Haman, to Eisav. So actually what we're seeing is whether you have the privilege of honoring parents, grandparents, great-grandparents, or you don't, either way, you're presented with an amazing opportunity. Because if you're fortunate enough to have parents, grandparents, and so forth, then we need to think this is an opportunity Hashem is giving us in the end of days to finally give that knockout punch to Eisav and overcome the merit that Eisav has to bring the Gula. And if you don't have that privilege, in a certain sense, you have the opportunity to fulfill the mitzvah in the greatest possible sense by desiring to perform the mitzvah. But let's stop and think about this for a moment. That means that the battleground between the Jewish people and the nations of the world is in the arena of which mitzvah? Honor your father and mother. That's where it's at. If you want to know, the nations of the world are trying to prevent the Geula from happening. They're trying to prevent us from coming back to Eretz Yisrael and returning to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and we're making every effort we can to return to Hashem. Where is the boxing rink? Where is the great battle between Klal Yisrael and the nations of the world? It's about the mitzvah of Kabed es avicha v'yasimecha. Why of all mitzvahs? Why is this the main mitzvah? Why is this the most important mitzvah? Why is this where the battleground is? So I want to share with you an amazing idea. This is an idea of Reb Shimon Schwab. It's not printed in his regular sefer, which is called Mayan Beis HaShoeva. It's printed in a collection called Alei Higayon. He says something remarkable. He says, when Adam Harishon ate from the Eitz Hadas, which was the first sin, it brought disaster to the world. The original plan for creation was man was going to live forever, and people wouldn't have to go to work, and everything would happen without any effort. And then the moment Adam Harishon ate from the Eitz Hadas, he brought death to the world, he brought illness to the world. Now people have to work for a living. The whole world was downgraded, okay? Not only was the world downgraded, mitzvahs were downgraded. Mitzvahs are not on the same holy and pristine level that they once were. There's only one thing that was untainted and unaffected by the sin of Adam Harishon. What could that possibly be? The only thing that Adam Harishon did not downgrade by eating from the Eitz Hadas was something that didn't exist. Because if it didn't exist, there's nothing Adam could do for it, or do to it. Say, what didn't exist when Adam Harishon ate from the Eitz Hadas? There's only one thing that didn't exist. Parents. There were no parents in the world, because Adam was the creation of Hashem. So even though Adam Harishon diminished and made deficient all 612 mitzvahs, there's one mitzvah that retains its status from the way it was in Gan Eden when Hashem created Adam. You know what that is? Kabed es avicha v'yasimecha. It's the one mitzvah that it smells like Gan Eden. Actually, if you remember, when Yitzchak Avinu was on his deathbed, and he asked who he thought was Eisav he asked Eisav to bring him some food, and Yaakov masqueraded as Eisav. So when Yaakov walked in the room, what does Yitzchak Avinu say? Re'ei re'ach bani kareach hasada shaberch Hashem. What's going on? It smells like Gan Eden here. And you know why it smelled like Gan Eden? Because Yaakov Avinu was coming in with the mitzvah of Kibbud Av. And that's a mitzvah that takes the world back to the way it was before Adam Harishon sinned. So actually, this gives us an understanding of the important role, historically, that Kibbud Av Va'em plays in the destiny of the Jewish people. In other words, this is, in a certain sense, the mitzvah that could bring us to the finish line. But let's take this a little bit further. You know, there's a sefer, I just saw it on the way here. It's called Nefesh David. He teaches that, last week's parsha we read about the Akedah and the great merit of Yitzchak Avinu. The Akedah, we're still milking the Akedah. Every Rosh Hashanah, we all come to shul, we blow the shofar. Hashem, remember the Akedah. Remember, it happened 3,300 years ago. Didn't we use it up 5 years ago? Didn't we use it up 4 years ago? No, we're still milking the Akedah. We're still squeezing out of the Akedah whatever we can. And almost everything we do on Rosh Hashanah is to remember the merit of the Akedah. We mention it in the Rosh Hashanah davening. The reason for Tashlach. Why do we do Tashlach? The earliest source of Tashlach is to remember the merit of the Akedah, that Avram Avinu went to a river. There was a river in between Yaakov and the Akedah. What was the great zechus of the Akedah? What was the mitzvah? The Nefesh David says the mitzvah was that Avraham Avinu asked Yitzchak, let's do this. And Yitzchak said, sure. It was the mitzvah of Kibbutz Av. That's the zechus of the Akedah. That's the zechus we're still, so to speak, benefiting from in our time. This is the mitzvah that will take us to the end of days. So I want to share with you a very powerful idea. When Yaakov Avinu was born, Yaakov and Esau, they're arch rivals. I don't know if you like football, but before football games, they like to show the two helmets of the teams, crash together with like sparks coming out. I don't know, wrong crowd, right? But Yaakov and Esau, they're the arch rivals. It's interesting. When Yaakov Avinu was born, so Esau comes out first. Okay, good. And what's Yaakov doing? He's holding on to the heel of Esau. It's interesting. Some say that Esau, anybody know, is compared to which animal? Anybody know what animal in Tanakh? What animal is Esau compared to in Tanakh? He's like the pig. The pig, we know, doesn't chew its cud, but it does have split hooves. Why does it have split hooves? Because Esau is compared to the pig, and Yaakov is holding on to the feet of Esau. So since Yaakov was holding with his holy hands the pig feet of Esau, so at least the feet are kosher. They have split hooves. How? Because Yaakov was holding them. That's one reason. But Esau is born, and Yaakov is holding the heels of Esau. And therefore, when Yaakov comes out, what do they name him? Yaakov. Why? Because the word Yaakov comes from the word Ekev, heel. That's why he's called Yaakov? Because he's holding the heel of Esau? Is that such an epic moment in the life of Yaakov Avinu that one time he's holding the heel of Esau? So he's called for the rest of his life heel? What if he was holding Esau's nose? Then we would call him nose. If he's holding him by the ear, we would have called him ear. Why is this like the seminal moment in the life of Yaakov Avinu that he's born holding the heel of Esau? So from now on we call him Ekev. But does anybody know who's the real antidote to Esau in this world? Who remembers? For a free trip to Disneyland. On the school. I don't know. Anybody know? Who's the antidote to Esau? Remember Rashi says that Esau is compared to straw. Yaakov, the candle. But a candle can't burn down the straw. You need the flame. Who's the flame that consumes Esau? Yosef. Remember that? Yosef is called Sitnoi Shel Esau. He's the adversary of Esau. Yosef is the force that utterly destroys Esau. Now, I'm thinking, if Yosef is the force that utterly destroys Esau, then if Esau's force is Kibbutz Av, then you would have to think somehow Yosef counteracts that, right? But for sure, one thing, if you have two opposing forces and Yosef's the antidote to Esau, you gotta think that one time Yosef actually meets up with Esau and he gives him some kind of, big knockout punch. Does anybody know? Does Yosef ever even meet Esau? Did they ever even see each other? We're going to come back to that. Because remember we said that Eisav told Yaakov Avinu, I'll sell you the birthright, because hine anochi hoylech lamos. Anyway, I'm going to die. What he meant was, every day I risk my life to go hunting to serve my father. I risk my life every day to serve my father. What did Yosef do in the realm of Kibbud Av V'Em to counteract Eisav? So, it's interesting. Remember we said that Eisav wore special garments when he served his father? Yosef also had a special garment. You know what it was called? Ksainas Pasim. You know that some teach that when the pasuk says, Ve'asa loy ksainas Pasim, not that Yaakov made for Yosef special garments, Ve'asa loy. Yosef made for himself ksainas Pasim to be able to serve his father wearing special garments in order to counteract Eisav. Because he knew he's the adversary, he's the kryptonite of Eisav. So you have these, two great forces in the world. You have the force of Eisav, specializing in Kibbud Av, risking his life to serve his father, honoring his father, wearing special garments. And you have Yosef HaTzadik, who would also serve his father with special garments that he made for himself. And on that fateful day that Yaakov says to Yosef, go check out, where are your brothers? You think Yosef was safe going out on his own, checking on his brothers? You don't think Yosef knew that he was perhaps endangering his life to check on his brothers? The brothers didn't like him. Yosef knew he was endangering his life. But Yosef also knew that his task in this world is to counteract Esau. So he has no choice. He, so to speak, his akedah is to risk his life to listen to his father. But still, if Yosef is the kryptonite of Eisav, and Yosef is the adversary of Eisav, and he's the flame that destroys Eisav, you gotta imagine that the two of them once got into a boxing ring somewhere, and they went at it. Did they ever even meet each other? Does anybody remember any occasion where Yosef meets Eisav? Anything come to mind? One thing for sure, not one word in the Torah is recorded that Yosef ever said to Eisav. But they did meet once. But let's point out one thing. Studying the Kibbud Av of Eisav, as great as it was, as powerful as it was, could you think of anything deficient in Eisav's honor to his Av V'Em? There was something actually very deficient. And that is, even though Eisav specialized in Kibbud Av, he was terrible in Kibbud Em. He married women that made his mother miserable. They were Oved Avodah Zarah. They brought incense to idols. Rivka was very unhappy with them. Rivka was very unhappy with Eisav. Eisav did not respect his mother at all. In fact, did you know the Ramban says that when Rivka passed away, Eisav was a no-show at the funeral. He didn't show up. They didn't get along. So even though he's the paragon of Kibbud Av, he was severely, fundamentally deficient in Kibbud Em. So if Yosef ever got a hold of Eisav, there's one thing Eisav is going to show, one thing Yosef will show Eisav. If you remember, when Yaakov Avinu is returning to Eretz Yisrael, and Eisav is making his way with 400 men to attack Yaakov and his children, do you remember the order the Torah says in which Eisav meets Yaakov Avinu? First he met Bilhah and her children. Then he met Zilpah and her children. Then he met Leah and her children. V'achar kain nigash Yosef v'Rachel. Then he met Yosef, and then he met Rachel. And Rashi's troubled. Well, wait a second, why did the order change? Usually he met the mother and then the children. The mother was standing there protecting her children. But by Rachel and Yosef, first came Yosef and then came Rachel, says Rashi. Yosef stood up tall and he says to Eisav, don't you dare lay your dirty eyes on my mother. Yosef protected his mother. He didn't want Eisav even to look at her. What Yosef was saying, in my opinion, is that you, Eisav, you may excel in honoring your father, but you're horrid, you're terrible in kibud aim, you're terrible in the respect that you have to your mother. But me, I'm your antidote, I'm your kryptonite. Not only do I risk my life to serve my father Yaakov, I will risk my life to protect my mother. And with that, that's the knockout punch to Eisav. Because while the nations of the world, they have honor for their father, the real knockout punch that we give to Eisav is the honor we display to our mother. Let's come back to the birth of Yaakov Avinu. You know the Balei HaToisus, which are Rishonim, who explain the Chumash. They say that Yaakov Avinu, even as a young newborn, you know why he's holding on to the heel of Eisav? He's holding on to the heel of Eisav because he knew his mother's having twins. Why should she have to go through the pain twice? Let's make it easier on mom. She's giving birth to Eisav, I'm right after him. This way it's like only one child was born. The reason why he held on to the heel of Eisav is to save his mother pain. That was such a seminal moment in his life. That was a defining moment in his life. For all eternity, the Jewish people are called Yaakov. You know what Yaakov means? Someone concerned for the pain of their mother. That's the definition of a Jew. The definition of a Jew is someone who will give their skin for their mother. That's the meaning of Yaakov. And in a certain sense, that is the final knockout punch to Eisav. You know, it's amazing when Rivka tells Yaakov Avinu that you need to go marry a woman in Aram Naharaim, go to my brother's house, go to Besuel's house, and go marry someone over there, go marry Rachel, go marry Leah. You know, the pasuk goes on to say that Yaakov Avinu listened to the voice of his father and his mother. And then the pasuk says that Eisav overheard that they told Yaakov that he should not marry one of the women from Canaan. So Eisav followed suit and he married someone and he listened, it says, to the father. So here you have it. The point of contention between Yaakov Avinu and Eisav is the honor we give not only our father, but the honor we give our mother. In fact, do you know what the word Yosef means? Why did Rachel name him Yosef? Because Rachel said, until now I had no children. So when anything happened in the house, anything broke in the house, it was all my fault. But now that I have a baby, I could blame everything on the baby. Asaf Hashem es sharpens. God has gathered in my shame. In other words, Yosef's definition, Yosef's reality is he's there to protect the dignity of his mother. So here we are. We're in 2025. Our sages have identified our generation as called Ikvisa de Mashiach. We're nearly at the finish line. And among many mitzvahs, a very important mitzvah we need to focus on in a generation where people forget about this and don't value this is the honor and the respect and the darach eretz and the concern that we have to our father and mother. Don't think it's a small thing. There's nothing greater in the whole world. Thank you very much. Agan Erev Shabbos, bracha v'hatzlacha.